With us having covered so many of the big studios, it's hard to fathom that we've barely talked about Cartoon Network. Sure, we talked about the individual shows, but never the network itself. Well, today that changes as we're going to cover 107 facts you should know about Cartoon Network. Number 1. The idea of Cartoon Network was born quite a few years before it would actually go live. By 1986, channels like Nickelodeon and the Disney Channel were gaining quite a lot of traction with children's programming. So the Turner Broadcasting System, TBS for short, decided they wanted to give it a go. Number 2. To this end, they needed cartoons. At the time, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer was almost broke, so TBS bought it and their entire library of cartoons, which included pre-1948 Looney Tunes, Merry Melodies, and the Popeye cartoons from Fleischer Famous Studios. Number 3. This relationship wouldn't last, however, as TBS couldn't really sustain MGM themselves, and sold it back to MGM CEO a mere 75 days later. However, TBS kept control over the film library. Number 4. So in October 1988, it was time for Turner Network Television to go live, including the aforementioned cartoons in the lineup. Number 5. But of course, 50-year-old cartoons alone can't sustain a complete network. So in 1991, Turner won out a bidding contest with Universal and Hallmark over the library of Hanna-Barbera animations for the neat price of $320 million. Number 6. Now, CEO Ted Turner thought he had enough of a library to shake it up with the other networks broadcasting children's TV and give them a run for their money. So he instructed the vice president of TNT, Betty Cohen, to lay the groundwork for what would become Cartoon Network. Number 7. On October 1st, 1992, they went live for the first time in New York City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Dallas, and Detroit to begin with. Number 8. They did this with great fanfare as well, set to the music of Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, followed by a special event hosted by Droopy of all characters. Number 9. And we haven't been completely honest with you, because until 1995, it wasn't just called Cartoon Network, it was called The Cartoon Network. The was an official part of the name until cooler heads prevailed and they dropped it. Number 10. Of course, Cartoon Network wasn't the first one to use cartoons to pull in their audience, but it was the first 24-hour channel to mostly focus on animation. Number 11. The reason they were willing to chance this was because TBS had launched CNN in 1980, the first 24-hour news network, which was also considered to be a risky play when it launched, but it was massively profitable, so they took the risk on cartoons too. Number 12. Still, one of the biggest problems the network had early on was selling people on the idea of 24-hour cartoons. However, because it all fell under the Turner Media umbrella, they were quite successful in offering package deals. Number 13. For quite a while, they still aired black and white cartoons late at night. These were the genuine 1930s cartoons, Max Fleischer and the likes, and they only stopped airing them in 2002. Number 14. In fact, they didn't stop airing the acquired cartoon shorts their network was built on until 2017. Number 15. They also had a block called High Toon Noons, hosted by cowboy hand puppets for an indication as to how simplistic they were willing to let their programs be. Number 16. But after Nickelodeon proved how successful in-house cartoons could be, Cartoon Network wasn't far behind, and in 1993, they produced their first one, The Moxie Show. Number 17. This show actually went through a lot of names, as it's occasionally also known as The Moxie Pirate Show or The Moxie and Flea Show. Number 18. That said, Cartoon Network never released this show on home media, either DVD or even VHS, and no full episodes exist on the internet. So even though clips of it remain, recorded by people at home, it's considered a lost show. Number 19. In that, it's a strange mirror to Nickelodeon, which also had one of its earliest shows being lost to history, as we mentioned in our 107 Facts about Nickelodeon. Number 20. Again, similar to Nickelodeon, they ran a short show of pilots called What a Cartoon, some of which would later become their own shows. Number 21. And yes, this one also involved Fred Seibert of Frederator Studios for basically the entire run of the show. Even though this was only one season, it did go on for almost 3 years. Number 22. But this opened the floodgates, and while The Moxie Show was the first one of their in-house productions to air, it wasn't the first one to be produced. That honor falls to Space Ghost Coast to Coast, but that hinges on a bit of technicality. Number 23. Of course, this needed a name, so after no doubt weeks of deliberation, many meetings, and I don't even want to guess how many liters of coffee, they came up with Cartoon Cartoons. Great job, guys. Stellar creativity. Number 24. That said, the show themselves were a lot better, because the first one of these to hit the air was Dexter's Laboratory, or Dexter's Laboratory, in 1996, which really was a who's who of big names in animation. The creator was Genndy Tartakovsky, but it also included Seth MacFarlane, Butch Hartman, Rob Renzetti, Chris Savino, and more. Number 25. Dexter's Laboratory was very successful, and even though it was set to end in 1999, it proved popular enough to keep it going for another 4 years. You could learn a lot about Dexter's Laboratory in the 2 107s we did about it. Number 26. This didn't include original creator Genndy Tartakovsky though, as he moved on to produce other shows like Samurai Jack and Star Wars The Clone Wars, but more on that later. Number 27. Of course, Dexter's Laboratory has one of the most infamous children's cartoon episodes ever produced in Rude Removal. Even though any rude language was bleeped out, it was still banned from airing. That is, until 2013 when Adult Swim uploaded it to YouTube, which has since disappeared, but you can still find it if you go looking. Number 28. 1996 also saw an interesting leap on the business side of things because TBS merged with Time Warner. So even though Warner sold Nickelodeon in 1986 because they didn't really think it was worth it, now they were right back into children's television. Number 29. This also got them access to the rest of the Looney Tunes, which would air on Cartoon Network for the rest of their time on TV. Number 30. July 1997 was quite a busy month for Cartoon Network, as it saw the launch of Johnny Bravo and 1 week later, both I Am Weasel and Cow and Chicken. Number 31. Of these three, Cow and Chicken was the most successful one, at least initially, but the tide did start turning on it pretty quickly. Number 32. This show was somewhat controversial because of the arch nemesis of the titular characters, specifically the Red Guy. His superficial resemblance to Satan and attempts to lure the main characters to hell made some people upset with the show. Number 33. More offensive than this was the episode The Buffalo Gals, which involves a biker group consisting of butch, short-haired women who break into people's houses and chew on their carpet, and various other innuendos. It was only broadcast once and pulled from subsequent airings. Number 34. The spin-off of Cow and Chicken, I Am Weasel, was a little bit more successful, with 79 as opposed to 52 episodes, and it ran for one additional year. Number 35. That said, of the three shows released that month, Johnny Bravo would have the longest lifespan as it didn't end until 2004. Number 36. Yet, this was not a given by any means. With the initial success of the other two, Johnny Bravo was put on something of a back burner and just kinda sat there for 2 years after a mere 13 episodes. But then it was revitalized in 1999 and became more focused on slapstick comedy in the remaining 3 seasons. Number 37. 1997 also saw the start of Toonami, Bless, where Cartoon Network would primarily air dubbed anime like Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z. Number 38. Even though parent company Time Warner acquired the rights to what would become the most popular dubbed anime at the time, Pokémon, they kept that one to themselves on the Kids WB block, at least initially. Number 39. Why this was? Probably a money thing. They were released in tandem with Pokémon Red and Blue on the original Game Boy, and with the games proving so popular, it was a logical thing to cut out one extra corporate layer that would need to earn money from the show. Number 40. Next to hit the air was the Powerpuff Girls, another unqualified success for Cartoon Network as the show would run for 6 seasons until 2005. Number 41. This was also the last show made by Hanna-Barbera Studios because it was folded into Warner Bros. In 2001 after the death of William Hanna. The remainder was animated by Cartoon Network's in-house studio. Number 42. The CW did announce a live-action adaptation of the Powerpuff Girls in 2020, but after the script for the pilot got leaked and the reaction was terrible, they announced that they would rewrite the whole thing. Number 43. Moving on to what would become the biggest hit for Cartoon Network, Ed, Edd n Eddy. This was the first show produced by the network that didn't start life in the What a Cartoon show. Even though some parts of Ed, Edd n Eddy totally disturbed me, freaking I love that show. Number 44. Airing from 1999 to 2009, it was the longest running of the cartoons, by quite a margin, seeing how the 3 runner-ups each ran for 7 years. Number 45. 1999 was quite a year for Cartoon Network as it also saw the first airing of Mike, Lou, and Og, but the less said about that the better, and Courage the Cowardly Dog, the show that was way more terrifying than a kid's cartoon had any right to be. Number 46. A popular theory is that Courage and his owners, Muriel and Eustace, don't really live as remotely as is frequently shown, but because they're an elderly couple, they don't have the mobility to travel very far anymore, and thus the farmhouse is all that Courage knows. Number 47. Because the final episode was somewhat of a downer, in 2014, a CG animated pilot was released called The Fog of Courage as a potential revival of the series. However, the project never came to fruition. Number 48. Then in 2018, series creator John Dilworth said he was in negotiations with Cartoon Network about another possible revival, but that also fizzled out, with Dilworth commenting in 2020 that it was transformed into another thing. Number 49. The year 2000 saw the release of Sheep in the Big City, and what a way to sound off the new millennium. Even though it was a hit on initial release, it only ran for 2 seasons, which is pretty low for Cartoon Network so far. Of all the shows, this was one of the shortest lived ones, as the network only aired reruns for 1 year after its conclusion. Number 51. Also in 2000, the programming block Boomerang finally spun off into its own separate channel, now that the networks were capable of handling the extra capacity. Number 52. Strangely enough, this wasn't the end of the block on Cartoon Network itself. That would trundle along for another 4 years, even though they now had a dedicated channel. Number 53. The year 2001 would bring along quite a shift for Cartoon Network, as the first president, Betty Cohen, would resign due to creative differences with Turner Broadcasting head Jamie Kellner. She was replaced by Jim Samples. Number 54. Of course, that reason is so vague it's basically meaningless, but she would state later on, quote, "I was afraid I would die the queen of cartoons." Unlikely, but let's face it, there are worse titles to die under. Number 55. But overall, 2001 was a pretty good year for Cartoon Network, as it would see the launch of Time Squad, Grim and Evil, and the big one, Samurai Jack. Number 56. Incidentally, Samurai Jack was the last show to be greenlit by Betty Cohen. Number 57. The funny thing about Grim and Evil is even though it only had 26 episodes, technically divided into 75 segments, but those were only 7 minutes each, it still got 2 spin-offs, Evil Con Carne and Billy and Mandy, at least the former of which was more successful than its progenitor. Number 58. That said, Samurai Jack never really fell under the Cartoons umbrella, and by 2004 the writing was on the wall for this block. Number 59. The funny thing is, unlike the thing it's most comparable to, Nicktoons, there wasn't really any kind of replacement for it. The name just faded into obscurity, and Cartoon Network aired the shows that had been airing for years on the main channel. Number 60. On July 19, 2002, Cartoon Network held a Summerfest, during which they would get to vote on what would be the next show from the series of shorts. The winner of this ended up being Megas XLR, inspired by the mech anime genre. Number 61. Before all that happened though, Samurai Jack became one of the best regarded shows on the network so far, having won 8 Primetime Emmys as well as 6 Annies, which is rather incredible for a show that only ran for 4 seasons. Number 62. But with this, it's almost like Cartoon Network was freed from restraints that it previously put on itself, as they launched 2 new massively successful features: Adult Swim, the block that would go on to air cartoons aimed at an older audience, and the first iteration of Teen Titans. Number 63. This really was a massive shift, as these were not just fully completed licensed properties that they used to fill the time slots. Teen Titans was the first time Cartoon Network produced an in-house show based on licensed characters. Number 64. Of course, it should be noted that Daddy Warner Brothers was footing the bill here, as they had struck an agreement with DC Comics for both movie and TV rights to their characters, which would go on to bring us movies like Batman Begins, V for Vendetta, and The Dark Knight. Number 65. But it worked. Teen Titans was a big hit with audiences as well as critics, consistently pulling in good ratings as well as another run of prestigious awards, even if it didn't quite match up with Samurai Jack. But hey, by then it had to compete with Avatar. Number 66. Meanwhile, Toonami was still doing really well. More and more dubbed anime were coming in, but again, Daddy Warner Brothers was starting to see the potential in Cartoon Network more and more, as they let them have Batman the Animated Series as well. Despite being over a decade old at this point, it was still very popular. Number 67. Same went for Superman the Animated Series, though neither of them aired on the channel for very long, both only about a year. Number 68. Cartoon Network continued acquiring popular shows, with one of the most notable ones being Totally Spies, which had already been running for 2 seasons successfully on ABC Family. Number 69. This actually ended up becoming one of Cartoon Network's longest running shows, airing on the network from 2003 to 2014. Number 70. That being said, with the change in networks, Totally Spies would lose some of its main voice actors, notably Katie Lee, voice of Alex, and Jess Harnell, voice of Jerry. Number 71. 2003 would see another big hit for Cartoon Network, again based on an existing property, The Clone Wars. Keep in mind, this was before the mouse bought up every IP they could get their hands on, which is getting increasingly hard to remember. Number 72. Also, The Clone Wars aired while the prequels were still running. Revenge of the Sith hadn't quite come out yet and wouldn't for another 2 years after the show started. Number 73. It was also in 2003 that Megas XLR aired, and it didn't really work. Didn't quite pull in the necessary ratings to justify the cost, so it was dropped after a year and a half. Number 74. The next year saw the release of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, helmed by creative director Craig McCracken, previously best known for creating the Powerpuff Girls. Number 75. To this end, Powerpuff Girls villain Mojo Jojo does show up in episode 1 of this show. Number 76. Some do say that this show kept the network alive after the ratings kind of slumped, following the cancellation of Dexter's Laboratory. How true this is? Hard to say. But I will say, it was definitely one of the more popular shows. Number 77. Cartoon Network went through a whole bunch of shows in this time, none of which would really catch on with the general audience. The most notable of these is Sunday Pants, which would only get 2 seasons. Number 78. That's not telling the full truth though. The show got slated for 2 seasons, but it was such a disappointment in the ratings that after 5 of the 11 episodes of the first season aired, Cartoon Network pulled the plug, and it's completely unknown what happened to the second season. Number 79. With that said, The Life and Times of Juniper Lee and later on Camp Lazlo didn't do horrible, both getting a decent run, and yet not really having the staying power that their previous shows did. Number 80. Luckily, in late 2005 or early 2006, when talking about wide release, the network would hit upon another big hit, Ben 10, which would go on to spawn no less than 3 spin-offs, a reboot series, and more. Number 81. Again, a bunch of shows launched in 2006 and 2007 that would only run for 1 or 2 seasons and never really land. The only noteworthy one is Transformers Animated, as it represents yet another step of Cartoon Network towards embracing licensed IPs. Number 82. In 2007, Jim Samples would leave Cartoon Network and would be replaced by Stuart Snyder, who had his own ideas of where the channel should go. Number 83. They tried their hand at a couple of live-action shows, given how successful those had been on Nickelodeon over the years, and boy did they learn the hard way that those were a lot easier said than done. Number 84. Unlike Nickelodeon, precisely none of them would prove to be successful for Cartoon Network. These included Destroy Build Destroy, Brain Rush, and Dude What Would Happen, to name a few. Number 85. Of course, Cartoon Network didn't heed good advice and tried to make Dude What Would Happen stick, it being very similar to the Discovery hit show Mythbusters, and ordered 4 seasons. This in spite of universal paddling sessions from both critics and audiences alike. Number 86. In fact, Snyder would lead the network through a whole list of so-called eras, most of them only lasting for a year or two, if that. None of these really managed to stick though, and constant rebranding didn't do the network any good until the change of the decade. Number 87. Avid viewers of Cartoon Network may have caught on to the one we're approaching now. With old hits like Powerpuff Girls and Ed, Edd and Eddy slowly being phased out, Cartoon Network needed a new show to carry the studio, and after all the aforementioned meandering, found it in Adventure Time. Number 88. Worth noting that in an alternate timeline, it could have easily ended up as a Nickelodeon show. It was pitched by Frederator Studios, I promise there's no bias here, to Nick twice, and yet they passed it over both times. Number 89. Adventure Time has the most episodes of a single show to come out of a Cartoon Network at the time of its conclusion, coming in at 283. Ben 10 does technically have more, clocking in at 350, but that's spread across all of its spin-offs. Number 90. On top of that, because the network decided to split the final season into 2, it's the first show of Cartoon Network to break 10 seasons. Number 91. But don't worry about Nickelodeon though, because they clearly made the right call, rejecting the pitch for this massively successful show in favor of Fanboy and Chum Chum. I can't think of a joke here. Nothing I could say would make this either more poignant or more hilarious. Funny enough, it was also a Frederator show. Number 92. And now we once again enter into a throw everything at the wall and see what sticks period with such timeless classics as Tower Prep, Robotomy, and The Problem Solvers with a Z. Just so you know it's cool. Number 93. That's not entirely fair though, as this period did see the release of The Amazing World of Gumball, which is technically on hiatus at the time of writing, but hasn't been officially cancelled, so who knows what'll happen. Number 94. But one of the big ones would come in 2013 with Steven Universe. This would be another show that defined a generation of cartoons, particularly in what was considered acceptable for a children's cartoon to be discussing in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity. Number 95. That having been said, this kind of discussion didn't come out without a price, as it faced some form of censorship in basically every country or region under the sun. 96. But at the same time, it was enormously influential on how other Western shows dealt with those themes, such as The Legend of Korra and She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. Just goes to show, you can't push boundaries without pissing a few people off, but sometimes that's exactly what's needed. Number 96. With all of that, Steven Universe definitely struck a chord with audiences, as it ran for 5 seasons with 160 episodes total over 6 years. Number 98. And as a cherry on the cake, Steven Universe got a movie in 2019 and a limited epilogue series of an additional 20 episodes running until March 2020. Number 99. Meanwhile, Cartoon Network decided to take another stab at the Powerpuff Girls, but this time with much more limited success. Despite there being 3 seasons produced, the latest episode aired in June 2019, and this show is presumed cancelled, even if not officially. Number 100. And the network would have one of its most epic fails in Long Live the Royals, having one of the shortest runs of any show ever, 4 episodes across 4 days. Excellent. Number 101. Meanwhile, another change of presidents for the network was on hand, with Christina Miller taking over the reins from Stuart Snyder in 2014. Number 102. This is where things get a little tricky though, as we have constantly been talking about how Ben 10 has 1 root show and 3 spin-offs. Well, no doubt some of you are already telling me I'm wrong in the comments. There's also a 4th spin-off, this one being a reboot. And yes, this does exist, and it only ended earlier this year. Number 103. Moving on to OKKO Let's Be Heroes, because that's more interesting to talk about, mostly because the episode Crossover Nexus, which has Garnet, Raven, and Ben Tennyson appearing. Yes, I'm a sucker for crossovers. Number 104. Speaking of Raven, we haven't mentioned Teen Titans Go yet, In spite of criticism over the show appearing overly simplistic and some would even say juvenile compared to its predecessor, it has been very successful, as it's still running to this day. Number 105. Here we get another rapid changing of the guard, with Miller leaving in favor of Michael Auerlein, who would only stay on as interim president for about 6 months before he was succeeded permanently by Tom Ascheim. Number 106. 2019 would also see the release of moderate success Infinity Train, which the creator Owen Dennis has expressed a desire in continuing, but Cartoon Network decided otherwise after 4 seasons. Number 107. And that brings us pretty much to today, with the major upcoming releases being spin-offs of We Bare Bears, one from Adventure Time, and another series of Ben 10. How rosy that looks? We'll leave up to you to decide. And that's it! 107 facts about Cartoon Network. What show holds a special place in your heart? And which one would you like to see either be continued or rebooted in the future? Or, which one would you like us to cover as a 107? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're down there, hit the like and subscribe button if you want to see more of our great content. And remember, Frederator loves you.